Good evening, everyone. Welcome to our live broadcast of the launch for Susan White's new book, Skyward. We're so glad you're all here. We're having a really exciting launch today. This is one of the first live streams with StreamYard we have had. So we have attendees coming in from all across Atlantic Canada via Facebook today. And I can't imagine a better venue than a virtual launch for this future-focused kind of book by one of Acorn Press's most prolific authors, Susan White. What's more, this evening, we also have a very forward-thinking young person from a very digitally focused organization here to co-host with me. That would be 15-year-old Molly Powers, a youth ambassador from Digitally Lit, Atlantic Canadian Youth Read. Just a heads up, because we have a co-host who's under 19, a limited amount of time allotted, and folks who are minors in our virtual audience, we will be monitoring live comments. So if we don't get to your comment, please understand. All right then, we have lots of exciting things to share, so let's get right to it. First of all, the book. Skyward is Susan White's first young adult fantasy novel. It is a hopeful story about a crumbling dystopia. Skyward is a reminder of what happens when we put money before people and how love is the best resistance. Emery is a less than, raised behind a wall and under a roof that rarely opens, in a system that grooms some to be lowly and some to be elite. When she is offered an assignment to take care of the old ones, she glimpses a world beyond the restricted one she has known. She plans to escape with Augustus, who longs to see the farm he used to live on, and Emery learns much more about the system that kept her from ever seeing the sky, and about the beautiful, rich world she's been kept from. She tastes food, sees trees, and uncovers her own past for the first time. Here is some early praise from fellow Acorn author, Hugh MacDonald. He says, Skyward engages the reader and doesn't let go until the final page, even then, reluctantly. Emery begins as a number trapped in an impossible and hopeless situation, and takes us with her as her generous heart and great courage undercovers a wonderful life and a hope-filled future for herself and for those around her. A terrific YA novel. He's very generous with his quote. It's a very wonderful book, though, so I hope you all feel the same way. All right, then. So I think it's time we hear from the author, Susan White. Susan, would you do us the honor of reading a passage from your book, perhaps providing the listener with a little context?
Sure. Thank you, Terry Lee. And thank you to Hugh MacDonald for, as Terry Lee said, a very generous blurb or comments about Skyward. I'm going to read midway through the novel. Molly's going to read, I think, a little bit later, and she's going to read some from the first page. So I'm going to just jump right in. At this point, Emery and Augustus have already escaped. Emery helped Augustus escape from the old one's compound, and they've made their way to Augustus's farm on the lake. And Emery just has so much to learn, and she's so curious about everything. And one of the things she's very curious about and interested in is swimming. So I'm going to read a passage between her and Augustus. I keep forgetting about your limited knowledge and experience. You know how you waded into the water yesterday? Well, swimming just takes it a little bit farther. You let your body drop into the water. The human body is quite buoyant, meaning it will float. Now, it's not quite that easy, but with practice, you learn to move your arms and legs and let the buoyancy of your torso assist with movement through the water. That's called swimming. Augustus paused. We used to call Tate a little fish. He took to the water as soon as he walked. Who is Tate? I've not told you anything about my boy, have I? No reason for that, really, but I don't start my conversations with people I meet, telling them about my dead boy. I don't hide the fact, but I keep it close, just as I keep his memory right with me. Tate was our only child. We waited a fair spell before the good Lord saw fit to send him to us, and we sure as hell didn't have him long enough before the good Lord decided to take him back. It's never long enough when a parent buries a child. I'm going to stand up and start walking again before I seize up, Augustus continued. Wait till we get to the top of the hill and you see the place I call the park. They'd walked a short distance before Emery spoke. How old was Tate when he died? He was 10, healthy one day and at death's door the next. Janie blamed herself, but there was nothing she could have done. She got him to the doctor as soon as the fever started, but the virus that attacked his body had taken hold and no treatment changed the outcome. The dream I had last night was one I've had 100 times. Sometimes it's in a different place, sometimes the hospital, sometimes Janie's mother's house, and sometimes different rooms in our house. Even been in our old Chevy half-ton a few times. But always it's Janie holding her boy after his life had drained away, and always the fight she put up when she had to let him go. Don't suppose that picture will ever leave me until I join them in the Rockport Cemetery. Emery and Augustus rounded a corner, and what caught Emery's eye was the way the sunlight was streaming through the tall trees. The sunbeams flickered on the forest floor. She looked up to the canopy of mostly evergreen boughs with a few leafy branches mixed in. The overall effect was astounding. This is the park. I've only cut a few trees out of this stand over the years. This was Tate's favorite place. He would play in here for hours. He had names for every stump and an entire world imagined out. The park's perimeter being the border of his made-up country. I found treasures he left behind years after he passed. I still hope I'll come across something more in here. Augustus put his hands on Emery's shoulders and looked into her face. Emery, meet my boy Tate. There's not another place on this property you will feel his presence any stronger than right here. I am a happy man to be able to bring you to this place and introduce you to my son. You are now a part of my family, and I welcome you to the park. This land and this beauty now belong to you as well. May you never be taken from this place or have this place taken from you. Thank you.
That's great. What a great reading, Susan.
Thank you.
One thing I noticed, for those of us who read your books, there is a lot of swimming.
There is a lot of swimming.
I thought it was very appropriate that you read that section because swimming it must be pretty important in your own life too,
it
right?
Is.
Yeah.
It really is.
Good. Okay, so from my schedule, it's time for Molly Powers to take the reins, my co-host. Before I pass the discussion on to her, though, I'm going to take a moment to introduce her. Molly Powers is a 15-year-old from Paradise, Newfoundland and Labrador. For those of you who don't know, it's really called Paradise, and this little community is just outside of St. John's. As a bilingual youth ambassador with her digitally lit Atlantic Canadian Youth Read, Molly has sought and found many creative ways to engage her peers with the Atlantic Canadian books she loves. For example, back when the pandemic was first declared in March 2020, Molly spearheaded the In This Together social media campaign, where she encouraged Atlantic Canadians to stay connected through reading books and sharing inspirational quotes, as well as pictures with their favorite reads on social media. Through Digitally Lit, Molly has also founded Get Lit Library, a mini outdoor lending library featuring Atlantic Canadian literature, which she's helped to build with her dad and now maintains through community donations for the second summer in a row at Powers Pond Park in Mount Pearl. And finally, this spring, Molly launched On My Bookshelf. This is a very exciting digital adventure, a YouTube series she hosts where she interviews her favorite Atlantic Canadian book contributors, and that's how she met Susan. So welcome, Molly. Thanks for coming.
Thank you, Terry Lee. I'm pleased and honored to be here today to introduce and interview one of my all-time favorite authors, Susan White. Susan White was born in New Brunswick, and as a teenager, her family moved to the Kingston Peninsula, and she only left long enough to earn both of her bachelor's in arts and Bachelor of Education at St. Thomas University in Fredericton. She and her husband raised 4 children and ran a small farm while she taught elementary school. Since retiring from teaching in 2009, she's leaned heavily into her long life dream of becoming an author. Susan White's first book came out in 2011. At the launch of this book, The Year Miss Montague Cried, White set the goal of publishing a book a year for the next 20 years. Slightly ahead of her goal, White has already published 10 books with Acorn Press, and 2 new titles coming out this year. Of these 11 titles, 4 are adult fiction novels. These follow Maple Sugar Pie, which came out in 2017, Fear of Drowning, published in 2019, When the Hill Came Down, published in 2020, The Wright Retreat, coming fall 2021. Otherwise, 7 of Susan's books were primarily written with an audience of young adults and teens in mind. This includes, of course, her first book, The Year Miss Montague Cried, followed by 10,000 Truths, published in 2012. The Sewing Basket, published in 2013, The Memory Chair, published in 2015, Waiting for Still Water, published in 2016, Headliner, published in 2018, and finally, the focus of today's launch, Skyward, which of course was published in 2021. Wow, Susan, you have been quite busy.
Yes, I have. And thankfully, so has Acorn Press. Thank you, Molly.
Okay. I'm going to begin by reading a passage from Skyward. This is our very first introduction to Emery and her current situation. I'm going to read on page 2, so settle in. Emery looked around the room, moving only her eyes while keeping her head still, as the keeper led into her hall, into the grand hall. She had never been in the elite dining hall. She had heard accounts from some of the others. It was usually the olders in the last division who were put at the table to be tested, and as far as she could calculate, she was not yet considered an older. But perhaps she had lost count of her years, or been too young to keep track. The fall of the first snow, her only way of calculating the beginning of a new year. She also knew that sometimes the cover kept from the first snow. Emery wasn't sure where the word year even came from. Some of the others used it, and those who did seemed to give it a great importance. She also knew there was a certain point when olders were released. Where they went, Emery wasn't sure, but she always seemed they were excited about release day. Emery remembered with embarrassment a time that she thought the olders were the same as the old ones. Dixon had laughed at her confusion. The old ones don't live in this compound, Emery. Everyone knows that much. Where do they live then, if you know so much? Dixon said the old ones lived just outside the main gate somewhere. He had never been there, but olders sometimes got sent to look after them. Before his release, Terence was sent there for a while, and he told Dixon a little bit about the place that housed the old ones. The old ones were kept in a building where they were fed and kept comfortable until they died. Dixon told Emery everything he knew. And since that day, she had picked up on more details and had a genuine interest in knowing more. One detail intrigued Emery the most. The old ones in the compound outside the wall grew up in a time before the wall existed. The fact had piqued Emery's curiosity about the before time. Emery questioned anyone who thought she might have any knowledge of that time. Before the walls were built, the walls contained the establishing compound, which was divided in 2 parts, one side housing the elites, the other the less than, from infancy to older. The less than side of the establishing compound was all Emery knew, besides the shards of rumor regarding the other side in the old one's compound. Audrey, who cooked in the less than eating house, said there used to be families there before this wall was built. The families had their own houses where they raised their children instead of bringing them to the establishing compound. Thompson, who was at least at first snowfall younger than Emery, seemed to take such pleasure in telling her what she knew. Before the wall was built, there had been 2 towns, cities, even countries. Emery wasn't sure what those things were. But Thompson said they had names, boundaries, and laws, and had no real wall separating them. I'm going to leave you guys there on a little cliffhanger.
Thank you. I enjoyed that, Molly. It's always nice to hear somebody else read my work. I enjoyed that.
Perfect. So let's get right into the questions now.
Okay.
At Digitally Lit, we're really interested in how people relate to identity and place through books, and how these relationships to learning might serve to empower the youth of today. Okay, question number 1. With regards to identity specifically, can you briefly explain what is meant by the elites, less thans, enforcers, and the olds?
Okay. That reading that you just did, Molly, covered that a little bit, but I'll just expand on it a little bit. Elites are raised on one side of the establishing compound, and less thans are raised on the other. Elites are raised with privilege and comfort, and they're lavished with the best of everything, as was shown in the elite dining hall, which was very foreign to anything that Emery was used to. The elites are raised to believe in their intrinsic worth and their value, and they're also raised to believe in the unworthiness of the less thans. The less thans are raised in very stark conditions, very institutional, very stark sleeping quarters, eating quarters. They're given food that is just basically colorless lumps that come in a tray. They're not used to any kind of taste or texture or color in their food. And they're raised to believe that they are of no value, that they're worthless. They're given no pleasures and allowed no self-expression of any kind. They are numbered, not named. They are numbered and devalued, and they are taught, as I said, to believe in their worthlessness. The enforcers and the keepers, there's keepers, and then the enforcers are one above the keepers. They're the muscle behind the system. They enforce the system, and they keep the less thans in their place by force and by fear. Now, the elites, I don't expand on that too much in the book, other than in the dining test, there is a man that comes to orchestrate or to be in control of the dining test. And he's certainly in control of the elites as well, but it's a much more gentle force, I think, than what the less thans are used to. Now, the olders are the less thans and elites. They both fall into the older category at a certain time of their lives, and that's when they're in the last division of their training, and they're soon to be released. And the elites will be released into society to take the professional and the business positions in society, and the less thans will be released to do unpleasant menial jobs, and they both are released to fill their roles and to keep the system viable, so that the money that's made behind and the material benefit from this system continues. Now, the old ones, which is different than the olders, they're the elderly people, and they're put in compounds as well. Now, Emery does come to find out, once her and Augustus escape, that there's very few of those left, as there are very few establishing compounds left, but you'll find that as you read along. The system's been in place for about 20 years, and it's starting to deteriorate for lots of reasons. But the old ones are put in the old ones' compounds, and they're basically just fed and housed until they die. And they also are devalued and numbered, so their names and their past and their identities are stripped from them, and they're just, as the less thans are, very devalued and institutionalized. Mm-hmm.
Perfect.
Thank you.
What, if any, events in this novel are based on real life?
Well, it's funny. I dug through, I do keep a writing journal, and I dug through to actually figure out when I started this, because I see that the seed of the idea came the fall of 2016. But I did find where I actually started writing Skyward, and it was February of 2017. But definitely the seed of the idea came from all the news coverage in the fall of 2016 during the election campaign of Donald Trump. And as a couple of my other books, the actual beginning of the book came from a dream. I had a dream that of this dining test. And I think really my mind was in a place where day after day I was being told about this man who seemed to act and seemed to believe that he was so far above everyone else and wasn't accountable for some of the things he was doing and saying. And we know how that all played out, so I won't go any further into that. But I think that kind of was the beginning of that thought for me, that there'd be this system where they'd be raised specifically to believe in their value, and also specifically to believe in their lack of value. Right. After I finished writing it, I think not anywhere through it, but I think toward the end, or when I finished writing it, I could see that there were similarities to the residential school system that many countries established in the early 1900s. But Canada has the shame of realizing the injustice and how terrible that system was, because in the residential school system, kids were stripped of their identity, their family, their experience, their past, their ancestry, their culture, and their traditions, and nature and choice, which is what happened with the less thans. They were not given any of those things that make us into the human beings that we are.
Right. Wow. When I was reading the book, everything kind of like clicked for me in regards of like where the time we're at right now as Canadians, and the pain that we've all been acknowledging and trying to like repair between our country. And it kind of was like, well, if it wasn't repaired, this is the life that we'd be facing. I feel a life much like Emery's. Right.
And unfortunately, there are countries in the world where systems are still very much entrenched that do that to people, that put them in a specific, status or that sort of thing, which is still happening around the world. And often it's because of greed and disregard for humanity.
Right.
Yeah.
Is this your first time writing a dystopia?
It is.
How do you find writing this genre?
Okay, it is very much so.
Right.
I tell people usually I do take my books to the market, and I usually, give them prior to just give them a little blurb or whatever. Yeah. But I've always said, most of my books are set on the Kingston Peninsula.
Yep.
And then I say, and I realize that Skyward really isn't set anywhere in particular. Yeah. And it could be anywhere. And also the dystopian part of it, it's not futuristic or fantastical, like there's no, creatures or monsters, there's lots of monsters. There's lots of monsters, but there's no, creatures or kind of that sort of thing. Right. But it's an imagined society. I've created a world, and it's shaped by greed and self-serving motives, and it's controlling a population, which often in a dystopian novel, that's what's happening. There's a certain control that characters are trying to escape or trying to stop. That sort of thing.
Yes.
So yeah, it's definitely the first time. I don't know if it's the last. I haven't got anything else dystopian really on the back burner or in my mind, but yeah, I really enjoyed writing it. Like it just I enjoyed crafting it, but also really looking at the real human aspect of all the characters of nature, of the swimming and of the trees and of nature. Just being able to look at the sky, like that was a huge part of it.
Mm-hmm. If a movie was to be made about your novel Skyward, who would play Emery, Daisy, and Augustus?
Okay, I watched Hope's launch last night of my year as a space cadet, and she was asked a similar question, and she said about the young characters, she pretty much said the same thing that I'm going to say, or, I agreed with what she said.
Yeah.
I couldn't specifically say who I would want Emery or Daisy to be played by. I think I would know them if I saw them. So if there was a casting call, I would say, oh yes, she's Emery, or yes, she's Daisy. But Augustus, from the first time when I saw this question and thought about it, he's Morgan Freeman to me. He's Morgan Freeman of Shawshank Redemption and the bucket list. He's that wise, gentle, kind, caring man, and that's who Augustus is. Like, Augustus was a gem. He was that. So I could see that would be my answer to that it would be Morgan Freeman.
No, I see it. Next time I'm reading the book, I'll have his voice thing in my head.
Maybe he could do a reading for us sometime.
Yes, give him a shout. Back to the theme of identity. When writing your characters, was there any that were more difficult or fun to create?
That's a good question. It's funny because, of course, I knew Emery. I knew Emery right away. Right. I'm not sure where her name came from. A friend of my son's, he had a baby boy a year ago, and they called him Emery. And I'm like, oh, yeah, that's the character in my book. But I didn't realize until I started writing that she was actually Anne Marie, and that her name had been altered because names weren't of any value, and she was too young to remember her name, and she wasn't taken as an infant, but you'll find that out when you read it. But I loved creating her because at the beginning she's so confused, and she's so curious, and she feels so helpless. And the dining test, she also feels so lacking in any kind of courage or bravery because she sees Daisy stand up to the enforcers, and she feels like, she doesn't have that quality, that she's not brave, or she's not anyone that could make change happen or stand up for her beliefs. But she really comes, she grows so much in the novel to be, a real instrumental part of bringing an end to the establishing compound system.
Right.
She becomes so brave and focused. And by the end of it, in the prologue, epilogue, I get those two mixed up sometimes. At the end, like, she's the matriarch that's kept the family together, for many years, and she does become, and even with her own mother, because when she finally gets a chance to reconnect with her mother, she brings bravery and courage to her mother as well. So I had fun creating her. I just, like I said, Augustus was fun because I just found him lovable, and he was a combination of my husband and my dad and Morgan Freeman, but I didn't know that. But very vulnerable. He was taken. He had experienced quite a bit of loss in his life, and he was alone by the time they came and took him to the old ones compound. And he, had almost given up, and very vulnerable. But he too had his tenacity, like he spoke back to the people in the old folks in the old ones compound, and he gave so much to Emery. He shared so much with Emery. As the passage that I read, he shared his home, but he also shared his love of place and his love of nature and all that sort of thing. So I really enjoyed creating him. I enjoyed also building the connection between Daisy and Jonathan, because Jonathan is kind of between a rock and a hard place, and he really goes out on a limb to help Daisy and help her escape, and he sacrifices a lot because he would be definitely would be to his disadvantage if they had been caught. And so I liked building their relationship, and also just showing like he was raised in less than, and his sister, who was taken at the same time, was raised in elite. Right. And I won't say too much, but the connection right from the beginning, and you can see how one didn't give in to didn't abandon their own values, didn't give in to the teaching that they were indoctrinated to believe, and how that benefited both of them in the long run. So I enjoyed building all of them.
What, if anything, would you like to add?
Well, I didn't really prepare this one because I was hoping there'd be some other questions to take. I don't know what I'd like to add other than even just in reading it myself.
Yep.
You know, I always pick up my own books and read them, which seems like a really selfish, silly thing to do, but I always get more out of them when I read them over and over again. And that's just what I hope that readers do. You know, they get something that speaks to them. And so, yeah, I just like to say that I'm glad that it has seen the light of day. I'm glad that it's, and that, and I hope it, takes on a life of its own now that it's out there.
Me too.
Thank you. Thank you. Okay.
Great. Well, thank you both, Susan and Molly. That's really was a great chat. So again, folks, because our host, Ms. Molly Powers, is under the age of majority, we're screening questions and comments in real time as they come in. But it does look like we have time for questions from all of you guys too. So any questions you want to send along, Molly can vet them, or well, they'll be vetted and passed on to Molly, but she can sort of present them to Susan for you. So would you like to start with the first question, Molly?
Of course. Okay. Our first question is from Gwen Martin, and they asked, did writing this book make you feel more or less hopeful about the future?
Oh, that's a very good question, Gwen. I appreciate that. It's funny because I hear, in the write-up and in some of the comments about it, the blurbs and so on, dystopia or crumbling dystopian and a hopeful dystopian and dystopia and that sort of thing. And as I say, when I attribute it to the residential school system, when I look at it or compare it to that, in some ways, hopeful, more or less hopeful about the future. I think more hopeful. In the fact that I do believe that everything that society goes through, any hardship, any society, huge injustices in society, it's the spirit and the human contact and love and the human spirit that gives any of it hope. I mean, you think of things like the Holocaust and different things, like the only hope that comes is from within. And that's what makes the change. So yeah, definitely makes me feel more hopeful. I can see, things, that are so unfair and unjust in the establishing compound. But the fact that somebody raised in that can pull themselves out and find hope, that's, more hopeful. Gwen.
So, there was a question right there. I was gonna throw in a question, but we can do hopes first.
Okay, next question is from fellow author Hope Delvey. How has being a teacher influenced your writing? For example, were there any insights into different personalities?
I think being a teacher has absolutely influenced my writing. And I think being a teacher who read to her kids every day, and still I believe so strongly that teachers, every teacher from kindergarten to grade 12 should be reading to their class. Even if they're math teachers, they should read for 10 minutes or something, because I just think that that's where story, that's where identity, that's where, connection comes from. So absolutely, it's definitely different personalities. I mean, I taught for 29 years, so there were lots of different personalities. And I think anyone sees those, but certainly we see them on a daily basis when you're a teacher. So yes, for sure, Hope, it has influenced my writing.
Great. Are there more questions from the chat? Oh, there's one there, Molly.
Acorn Press asked, what is something you changed your mind about once you started writing this?
I gave this some thought because it was on one of the possible questions in the list that we made up the other day. And I don't know for sure. I'm a very fluid writer. I don't keep all my drafts. I just change things as I go along. And definitely things change. And I'm sometimes not even sure when or at what juncture they changed. And I really had no idea. Like I said, I knew the dining test and I knew something about the system. And other than what was going to happen, I don't know that I knew. I didn't. Oh, I'm not going to say that because that would say something, tell too much. But yeah, things happen. They pop up, and then it's like, oh, I didn't know that was going to happen right there. But that's the way it goes. That's the fun of it.
Great.
So something a lot of people ask about is about the process, and I just see one coming up there about that too. So, what is your process from, workshopping?
Right. And drafting, like I said, I admire authors that have, draft number 1, draft number 2, and they've got them all piled and filed in their offices. But mine is very fluid and changes, on the computer. But I keep notes. Like every time I start a book, I started one today. I got like 4 paragraphs written, but I keep notes and I keep character, notes and I often go back and look at that notebook that I have for that book and have totally, changed things. But so my drafting process is definitely a process. And that's how I do it. I don't do timelines per se. Hope said last night about timelines. I sometimes kind of know the ending, maybe, but it changes perhaps. But it's just a continual draft. And then, of course, I do a lot of rereading and revising, because when you're changing things, when you could go back to page 10 and realize that, you mentioned a character that you never mentioned again, or something that is totally in opposition to what you've done on page 50. So the drafting, as I said, is a continual, very fluid process.
Do you do it in paper or all on the computer?
The actual draft, all on the computer. Lots of notes on paper. Just if I get an idea, I'll write it down and go refer to it, or go back to it, kind of thing, from paper.
Right.
Molly, are there any more questions on?
Yeah. Colleen Russell asked, "How old were you when you were referred as an?" Wait, sorry. How old were you when you were referred to as an author?
Okay, that's a good question. I've told this story before, that I thought I wrote a really good story once, but my mother threw it away. But she can't take any. I can't blame her for that forever, and I'll have to let that go. But I remember I went to. When I was actually referred to as an author, probably I would say that I referred to myself as an author before anyone else did. Oftentimes we're not called an author until we're published, which in a lot of ways isn't really that fair, because there's a lot of wonderful authors out there that aren't published yet. But I was 52, I think, when I was published, so I was pretty old. But I remember writing. I went to a Maritime Writers Workshop when my son Caleb was like 4, and I wrote him a letter the week I was away, and I told him that his mother was an author, and that this is why I was gone, and all that sort of thing. So yeah, I referred to myself as one, possibly anyone else did. Thank you, Colleen.
52 is not that old, by the way.
No.
Just turned 50. So.
Exactly. No, it's quite
I remember reading something Bud Wilson said that life begins at 56, or when
she was
become an author.
56.
Whichever comes first.
Yeah.
So are there any more questions from the audience?
No.
There we go.
Jamie Roger asked, "I am a teacher. I call my students authors all the time."
There we go.
I used to have a couch in my room, and we'd have our writing conferences, and the kids would come and sit on the couch, and I always called my kids authors as well. And I had one little boy that the whole year I had him in grade 4. All his stories were about light bulbs, but he was an author.
Light bulbs.
Hope asked, "How have any authors influenced your writing?"
Oh, for sure. Lots. And I mean, I do go back to the cliche, but I loved Lucy Maud Montgomery. I just hung off her words. And she was so wordy, like that one of the, like, I think the first sentence is like 96 words long or something. And lots of other authors, and lots of authors that I've met, and lots of authors that I've read. Leslie Crew, I love her work. Lots of authors. And I do think, I don't read as much as I used to. I don't know why exactly, but I've read lots of good books, and read lots of good books to my students.
Right.
Great.
Yeah.
Ellen Whitaker Brown asked, are there any songs or musicians that influence your writing?
Oh, Ellen. I used to teach with Ellen. She's the principal at our school now. Well, in the Sewing Basket, which Molly will know, Ruth in the Sewing Basket was a huge Monkees fan, and I was too. Harry Chapin, I have a son named Chapin, so that should be something. Bob Dylan, lots of musicians have influenced I don't know that they've influenced my writing, but they've certainly, I think my writing, is emotional and, has, whatever to it. And I certainly gravitate toward musicians that have that same element to their work.
Yes.
Great.
Colleen has another question. What's your favorite children's book or author?
Okay. I really love Because of Winn-Dixie. When we were working on the editing of The Year Mrs. Montague Cried, this is a long story and I won't tell the whole thing, but I was asked to cut a major part out of it. And I really, really struggled with that. And it came to me that Because of Winn-Dixie is just such a simple, such a powerful story. And it's very, very, it's simple in that it's not real wordy or whatever. And I loved reading that one to my class. I love The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. I always read that to my kids. I love Where the Red Fern Grows. I love sad stories. But like what's his name? Wilson Rawls.
Eric.
Where the Red Fern Grows, and Summer of the Monkeys. That's a good one. And for any of you that know me, my grandkids call me Monkey, which has nothing to do with that book, but lots of good authors out there. Lots of great ones.
Just Colleen, Susan has sadness in some of her books, some more than others, but I always found that kind of appealing as a kid when I was reading, to be able to explore those emotions. I think they're sort of very important.
Yeah. In your opinion, in the world of Grammarly type apps, do you think a young student's voice in writing should be fostered and developed?
Absolutely. Now, of course, we want to teach them grammar and we want to teach them punctuation and all that stuff, but voice is definitely a strong, and it's a hard one to teach. It's a hard one to explain, but in The Year Mrs. Montague, and it's something that I used to do in my own classroom, I'd pick up a piece of writing that was from one of the students in my class and read it without saying whose it was. And often the kids would know whose it was. And especially if it was about a light bulb that particular year. But I would also, use books from my bookshelf and read it. And, they would know maybe it was Roald Dahl, or they would know it was, whoever, because voice is very important. And that's what you have to try to develop as an author, young or old.
Well, punctuation and grammar is important. I mean, at that stage, voice, like a strong voice, probably is more important. When you're, as a publisher going through manuscripts and stuff. I think. Right.
Yes.
Because we have editors who can
fix that stuff.
And we have editors love to hear that.
We have authors with bad habits, but.
Joy Martell asked, what themes would be in Skyward?
Okay, definitely. That's my cousin. Hi, Joy. Well, definitely, the theme of nature, and, robbing someone of nature is like the worst. Like to have a roof over this compound where they can't look at the sky. And she felt that right from the beginning. And she realizes later that she was like 4 years old when she was taken, and that the sky was a huge part of her first 4 years. And as you read it, you'll find out why. But family and connection and tradition and all those things would be the themes in Skyward. All the things that were taken from the elites as well. Like the elites really were just as, even though they had good food and comfortable beds and soft pillows and all that sort of thing, they were still robbed of all those things. So those are the themes in Skyward: family, connection, knowing who you are, knowing where you came from, knowing there's a place you belong. And having the freedom to make those choices and not someone tell you where it is that you belong.
Yes.
Well, Molly, I think we probably have time for one more question. What do you think?
Yes, I think you're right.
Great.
Barb asked, Sue, I always admired you for journaling. Do you still do this every day?
Every single day. Now, Barb was also a former teacher, and so I don't know if she actually used that word journal, whatever that word is, but journaling for sure. And that's her dog, Henry. I journal every day, and I kick myself for not journaling sooner. I was a sporadic journaler, and I started probably in 1990 sporadically when I was on my last mat leave. I always journaled at school. My kids journaled, so I have some good school journals. Right. But I started, when I retired in 2009, I started journaling every single day. So that's part of my morning routine. And if I miss it one day, then I just do 2 days the next day. But my daughter teases me and says I have more journals than anyone in the world, because I have my writing journal, I have my summer journal, I have my regular journal, I have a journal and all this stuff. But it's priceless when you can go back and look. And a woman that I admired greatly, Gladys Titus, she journaled a long time ago. She was 96, I think, when she passed, and she probably had journaled for 90 of those years. And they're priceless. I mean, whether anyone ever cares about them or whether they just have a big bonfire when I'm gone, I don't care. There's nothing I can do about that. But yes, for me, journaling is an everyday thing.
Great. There's some nice comments coming in there. Congratulations. I'm sure your friends who are watching are happy for you.
Good choice with mine. I just hope he sees this. Hope yesterday had a teacher, the teacher she mentioned, the daughter of the teacher contacted her. And then she said, the book she used about dodgeball, to research dodgeball, reached out to her. So I expect to hear from Morgan Freeman in the next couple of days.
Oh, yeah. Maybe he'll option the book.
Yeah.
That'd be great. Okay, well, I think it's probably a good time to wrap up, unless there's any last comments from either you, Molly, or from you, Susan. If there's anything else we want to mention.
I had said I was going to do a live. I'll send Morgan a copy. I was going to do a live launch this time so we could have cake, but I didn't do that. So maybe the next time. I have a friend that makes really good chocolate cake and boiled icing, and I thought we should eat cake and celebrate after the pandemic, but I'll do that next time. But these are kind of nice too, and I can just, get off and I'm already home.
Well, I mean, the other part of it is there is another book coming this year. We could always do kind of
we'll eat cake and celebrate for the Wright Retreat. That's what we'll do.
That's right, exactly. Well, thanks so much again. Thanks, Molly, for co-hosting and for your very clever questions and for having, taking the time to work with us on this. And thanks, Susan, for your many wonderful books. I am a fan, and I'm sure many of the people who are watching are fans as well. And as Molly said, she loves your books as well. So, you do have lots of fans out there, and hopefully we'll get this one out to a wide audience. Yeah. For those of you who are watching, if you're in the Kingston Peninsula, of course, Susan?
The farmer's market every Saturday.
Yeah, every Saturday.
2 weeks ago, I sold 51 books one Saturday. That was my first day for Skyward. So
she's a superstar.
Really
Yeah. But it is also available at a bookstore near you, any Chapters Coles Indigo, any independent bookstore, anybody that sells books will be able to get this for you. So, you can get it on indigo.ca or amazon.ca or nimbus.ca, of course, as well. So lots of places, lots of options to get the book. If you can't find it, just let me know. But as we said, Susan always has copies as well. So
yeah, I ordered Hope's 2 books today from Nimbus. So I had it sent right to my granddaughter. So hopefully they'll come soon. And Molly, I just love your smile, and I appreciate your interest and your enthusiasm so much.
Thank you for having me. It was an honor.
Oh, I'm honored that you did it. Thank you.
I think, there's such a great team at Digitally Lit. Also, thanks to the background team here too. There's people working away in the background, Robin from Digitally Lit and Genevieve from Acorn Press. And
yes,
there's also all kinds of other people who help put the books together. We mentioned the editorial process a little bit. Penelope Jackson, she does our young people books at Acorn usually. So she's a trooper, and the designers, the copy editors, everybody who helped put it together, we thank you. And we also like to say thank you to the funding bodies, the Canada Council for the Arts, the Canada Book Fund, the province of Prince Edward Island. They all help keep us going. The Digitally Lit is funded by the Canada Council for the Arts. So we do thank all the support from all of you too.
Right. I second all those thank yous, and absolutely thank you to Terry Lee, number one, from me anyway. Thanks so much. All right. That's great. See you next time.
See you next time. Thanks for joining us here.
Okay.